Hi everyone. I'm here with Frank Sherlock today, who's the VP of International at CallMiner. Frank, very welcome. Good to chat with you today.
Thank you, Chris. So just a few words about what we do in CallMiner. We're an interaction analytics company. So in essence, what we do is we allow our customers to gain insight from all of the interactions across audio, web chat, and the email and other channels to turn, which is data, we turn that unstructured data into structured data to help improve business performance, improve customer and employee outcomes. And it's a pleasure to be here, Chris, and looking forward to our conversation.
So I thought it'd be good just to chat a little bit first around what are some of the changes that you guys have seen through COVID. I mean, it's nearly a year now, certainly in the UK, since we were locked down. I mean, what's been the arc of change that you've seen in the industry over the last 12 months or so?
Wow, a big question. Yeah, who'd have ever thought we'd be here 12 months on? But I mean, it's an unprecedented event, so it's hard to say whether organisations' responses were right and appropriate. But I can certainly talk about what we've seen and what some of our customers seen. I think in the early stages, particularly, there was obviously the big push to. There's a lot of change, and change brings complexity, brings challenges for organisations. In particular, that the push to self-serve, the trying to get agents working from home in a hurry, and even some changes within customer attitudes. So what we've seen, we do literally hundreds of thousands of hours of conversations we analyze on a daily basis. So we were able to see quite quickly what some of the changes were. So first thing we seen was there's a lot more understanding, that we were all in this together. There was things like two-way empathy, for example. People would start the phone calls by saying, "Oh, isn't the situation terrible? Are you working from home?" So a lot more rapport, which we seen. Maybe handle times were a bit longer in relation to that, but we didn't necessarily see a big downturn in sort of customer outcomes or KPIs, but perhaps more handle time. There's also a couple of technical challenges with things like audio quality, and a lot of these self-service channels some of them were put together in somewhat of a hurry. We've seen with the breakdown of inappropriate self-service channels, a lot of customers arriving into the contact center for agent assistance in an already agitated state. So they were the sort of dynamics that we've seen in general. I mean, as a company, we got ahead of this a little bit. We established a coronavirus think tank. So we got all of our customers together to see what they needed, how we could help them, and through that think tank, there's a couple of themes that we helped with. One was, I think, to understand the impact of COVID on the customer base, and we were able to produce some new analytics categories to help them to home in on the voice of the customer, voice of the agent, and then what were the changes and challenges, and how do you prioritize those challenges, and then finally, I guess, how do you coach and performance manage agents in the work from home environment? So that particular exercise won an award from a Stevie Award, which is a Speech Analytics Council award. So in terms of industries, let me just concentrate on one industry in particular that we do a lot of business with, the insurance industry. Highly regulated, and it was really important to them that the pandemic was not seen as a reason, not seen as an excuse for maybe prompting customers for health insurance or life insurance. So helping to ensure that are health and life insurance customers, the agents were doing the right thing. And then on the other side of that, we take, say, car insurance. The impact of the pandemic there has been claims are radically down in car insurance, and some of the more forward-thinking insurers responded to that with things like mileage changes, etc., to dynamically change your premium. I think the impact of that this year or through the last 12 months would be probably a downward trend on the amount of claims. So from a car insurer, perhaps an improvement in profitability because they haven't got the cost associated with claims this year. But then on the inverse side, next year we're going to see that downward pressure on premiums. So I think it will, how this all plays out ultimately, I think will depend a lot around some of the uncertainty on the economy. I guess it's a long answer, Chris, to a short question. I guess my final point on this would be, I think the real heroes of all of this, besides obviously the key workers and the health service, in terms of customer communication and contact channels, the real heroes have been the agents. Thrust into working from home, isolated from colleagues, and still trying to provide the best possible service to the consumer. So I would say hats off to the agents would be the final point.
And I suppose in terms of some of the so in terms of like the call recording and the analytics, then you saw greater empathy coming through, and then but do you see more vulnerability coming through in terms of like people starting to think about vulnerability or mentioning that on the calls? I mean, if you sort of track some of the data that comes through.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I think it's a huge topic. I mean, there's been a lot of publications around vulnerability from the FCO, FCA, the ONS, and various people. I've got a couple of stats that are pre-prepared on vulnerability because I was hoping you were going to ask me about this. But so to put it into context about the environment that organizations are having to cope with in vulnerability is shifting dramatically. The FCA reported, I think last week, 27.7 million adults in the UK have some characteristics of vulnerability, poor health, low financial resilience, or recent negative life events. Employment, the UK unemployment figures came out today, and that's likely to reach 2.6 million by the middle of 2021. There's still 4 million people that are temporarily away from work that may or may not be going back to their jobs. And 9 million people had to borrow more money. This was, I think, in December 2020, the ONS produced a stat that said 9 million people had to borrow more money because of the coronavirus pandemic. And 10% of UK adults are effectively digitally vulnerable. And we'll talk a little bit perhaps about digital vulnerability later. But so there's a huge backdrop to heightened vulnerability and how organizations both measure and respond to that vulnerability, not just because they're regulated to do so, but because it's the right thing to do. And I think that many of our customers, yes, they're regulated. Yes, they have to respond to vulnerability appropriately. They have to treat customers fairly. They have to do what the regulator lays down to them. But socially and ethically, it's the right thing to do. So.
And I think it's quite interesting. You just mentioned it around. You actually saw that in some of your data. So if you look across your customers, you saw that in some of your data in terms of that greater rapport, empathy coming through as a result of it. Because I think we have responded quite well to that. I mean, people are dealing with people on an almost like a human basis, aren't they?
They are. But what? One of the things, Chris, that we see, at scale, is vulnerable customers don't always offer up the fact that they're vulnerable, and the skills and the training of the agents to be asking the right question, to be doing the signposting, to actually truly understand the nature of someone who is vulnerable but perhaps doesn't want to just say straight out right that I'm vulnerable. So it's hugely important. And I think the other side of that vulnerability equation is if you take it as fact, and I think it is fact, that more and more people are vulnerable, and therefore agents are presented with more and more challenging calls from customers in challenging circumstances, how you support the employee to be able to not just deal appropriately, but to counsel and guide and coach those agents and give them a break when you know that they've had a particularly heavy workload of particularly demanding calls from vulnerable customers. So I think there's two real sides to that vulnerability. There's the how do you measure, capture, and respond to the vulnerable consumer, and then how do you support the agents who are dealing with ever more vulnerable consumers?
Yeah, and obviously speech analytics can play a big part of that, which is what you guys do. I mean, so how do you sort of see that sort of fitting in with, I suppose, with digital journeys, and particularly quite interested in terms of like how this works when you got like an agent at home as well. So we've got a lot of distributed call centers now, whereas they used to be sort of on site, and you'd have that sort of like support, you'd have floor walkers, you'd have people sort of on site. Now it's much more distributed. You know, how does that link in with things like, you know, some of the analytics and some of the data that you can extract from the calls? I mean, what's been the experience there and how it fits together?
Yeah, so let's talk about these digital journeys first of all, if you don't mind, Chris. So 10% of the UK adults are digitally vulnerable. That came from the M&S in November. And when we say digitally vulnerable, they do not have the skills, perhaps, or the means to access digital channels. And it's really important that when you're designing customer journeys, you take account of this digital vulnerable, the people who need to speak to people. It will always be there. The automation of the mundane, the transactional, and recognize that most people, even if they're not digitally vulnerable, when they arrive with the contact center, it's generally going to be with a complex query, would be one thing I would say. In terms of analytics, yes, you know, we've got a whole host of content that we provide our customers to allow them to pick up on the signs of financial vulnerability or health vulnerability, whether that be physical or mental, and also digital vulnerability. It's really surprising, you know, well, perhaps not surprising, that when people arrive in a contact center having had a broken digital journey, they're very quick to say within the first 30 seconds or so of a call, hey, you know, I was trying to change my tariff on the website and it didn't give me the tariff I wanted, or, you know, your IVR threw me out, or whatever it may be. When you're using analytics, when you can capture that sort of thing at scale, you can see it happening consistently and persistently. You can use that insight to go back and fix the problem with the digital channel that led to the breakout into an agent-assisted channel. Yeah. So that's the, you know, where analytics plays on the journey, and where analytics plays on vulnerability. It helps to capture at scale where, you know, how many customers are experiencing vulnerability, and perhaps where did the agent respond appropriately to that vulnerability.
And when you've got agents at home, or like a distributed call center, you've got agents at home, is it really sort of seamless in terms of not really mattering that they're at home, or does it actually help the fact that you've got you know, additional analytics at home to then even pick up on, I mean, because it's tough working from home, right? And people are in tough situations, right? And they might be working from home, they've got family at home, you know, those kind of things. It's not the same as environment as being in the office. And, you know, can it help with that in terms of identifying, you know, maybe even, you know, challenges that employees have as well?
Oh, absolutely. So if you think about the way that the organizations have traditionally done quality assurance. They've taken a small percent, 5, 10, 15 calls per agent per month. Their calls have been listened to, they've been assessed, and then they have a sort of coaching and guidance session with the agent. Now, when you've got your agents working from home, you can't have that one-to-one conversation. And analytics has a huge part to play in this. That we for our customers, we provide holistic analytics. So we analyze all of their calls. So that would allow you to have a very targeted and focused conversation, not just around the 1 or 2 calls that we listen to, but around a consistent, holistic and objective feedback, but then also put in the tools to allow that coaching to take place. We have a module in our solution called Coach, which allows agents to see their performance trends against KPIs, that to allow them to self-adjust or let these supervisors use a data-driven coaching session. So where you can't be with the agent in person, you can provide very targeted and focused guidance and coaching that's data-driven. Is how we approach that topic.
I always like almost like the quality assurance, almost like the coach or the side-by-side coaching, where you're both looking at the same information. You're sort of like using that to then drive improvements as much as like the top-down kind of approach, which I'm a big advocate of speech analytics for that.
Yeah, I mean, speech analytics as a coaching tool. I mean, when it avoids all of the oh, you've just picked my worst calls this week, or why do you treat Chris better than me? I had a bad day on Monday, and you took Monday's calls. When you're taking listen, we're going to have a conversation, Chris, about all of your calls. You're really empathetic. You take ownership of your customers, but you speak a bit quickly sometimes, and there's a lot of sorry, I didn't quite catch that language from the consumer, just slow down. That is a much more valuable coaching session than saying, based on your 5 calls, you scored 9 out of 10 in each of the following 4 categories. So what?
And you're rolling that up into like scores, like speed scores or vulnerability scores, those kind of things, and you use kind of like models for that to come out with summary scores.
Yeah. So we score. The way that we work is the language is you can tag the language for keywords, key phrases. There's you categorize. We have a concept of categorization, which is how you'd find a category is something that you're interested in within a conversation. You can have as many categories as you want. You can have as many scores as you want. And the really interesting thing about numbers, when you score something, it's if I scored 72 on empathy, it's a number. So and my target is 80, and I have a coaching session saying I need to be more empathetic. I can see immediately whether or not my 72's gone to 75 or 80 or 90 as a result. So the supervisor can see immediately the impact of the coaching session, and so can the agent. So I think one of the big things, whilst analytics can be used for many things, provide actionable insight, improve business performance, one of the key things that our customers taken advantage of during the pandemic is to use analytics to have data-driven coaching conversations, and it's
that real-time feedback. It's that real-time feedback that you kind of get.
Yeah, it's that real-time or near real-time feedback that you simply didn't get pre the pandemic, but you can now get it, post the pandemic with speech analytics tools.
Yeah. And to create the scores, you obviously then need to extract the data, so you'll have all the various attributes around the conversations actually happening, the detail around the conversations happening. That's all within the system. But they often then get put into models that then get solved for something, so empathy or whatever it is. You use machine learning to obviously to extract some of that, and where does all that fit into the models? And I suppose one of the questions I was going to get to is really around explainability as well. So why was my empathy score 88 versus 80 or 90, and how do I know that that's real? I mean, how do you sort of explain some of that and solve for some of that?
So we've built our models based on hundreds of thousands, if not million hours. So our models are contact center models. So we haven't just gone to just conversational language models. We've built all of our machine learning around the language of the contact center. So that in the engine, if you like, of the speech analytics solution, you have a lot of there's a lot of hype out there about AI and machine learning. I think we were doing machine learning almost before the term was invented. So in the back end, we know. So for example, take a concept like dissatisfaction. There's probably over 200 ways that a UK consumer would express that they're dissatisfied. Anything from saying, I'm not happy about this, or profanities, or I want to speak to your supervisor. So being able to capture all of that language at scale and build that into the categories, directionally that when you're measuring dissatisfaction, the customer's dissatisfied. Now you can then so let's say a dissatisfaction score of 70, versus a dissatisfaction score of 90. You can overlay within the dissatisfaction, other categories like escalation. So I'm not very happy might score 50, whereas I'm not very happy, I want to speak to your supervisor, may score 70. I'm not very happy, I'm leaving, I want to leave you, may score 80. So you can adjust the scoring to the outcomes that you and the relevance and prevalence that you need. But the whole thing is backed by deep machine learning and AI within the engine from millions of hours of conversation.
And how does it change by market, right? So an expression, I mean, having worked in several different countries, right? I mean, it is quite culturally sensitive, some of this stuff as well. I mean, how do you think around sort of building it by market? So an expression of dissatisfaction in the UK might be very different than, say, it is in Canada or in the US or those kind of things. And even within the US, it might be different, or even within the UK, it might be subtly different. Do you see those subtle differences, or is it perception?
You absolutely do, and the subtle differences don't just start. The subtle differences actually start with the language models themselves. Yeah. So UK English is not the same as Australian English. Yeah. It's not the same as South African English. The lexicon of words and phrases that form a language pack for South Africa. So one of the things we do, I probably should have said this a bit earlier, one of the things we do is for audio is we transcribe every word of every call, and we use a speech to text language pack to do that, which has got a huge lexicon of words within it. But the lexicon for Australia, because they Australians have different words, they use different words, and how they then express themselves, there may be, and I don't know if this is fact or not, but I'll use it as an example. There may be 200 ways that we express dissatisfaction within the UK. Yeah. There may be 130 within Australia, and of that 130, 30 of them may be unique to the way Australians express themselves. So we absolutely see both a cultural and a language difference from geography to geography, and we build our models in accordance with them differences.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting, like how it changes and how people respond will change, and even how they express that dissatisfaction will kind of be different as well. I mean, so what might seem like dissatisfaction in one country might actually not be in another country as well. I mean, it can be really quite different, really, I suppose. And so where do you think we go from here? And obviously we've got this massive data that's being collected, like contact data that's being collected, including speech data, all which is being analysed. We've got models that are now coming out to be able to determine various factors around what's going on with customers. But where do we go next from here? I mean, what's next on the horizon, do you think?
So for us, I think it's about extending the ecosystem. Now, this data that we produce can be used in many different ways and can coexist. So things like, I've already sort of hinted about going back, using the data to go back and correct sort of self-service journeys, for example. Yeah, but truly integrating, say, the robotic process automation or the chatbot or the NPS survey infrastructure with the data from the conversations using APIs. So allow that cut the secondary and tertiary analysis from the data and allow all of these systems to coexist and be interconnected. And it sounds like, wow, sounds like Star Wars. But I certainly think that the advent of open APIs has made that a possibility. We built our platform from the start with APIs in mind, and we integrate an interface to many different third-party systems, whether it be CRM systems or CX performance systems or IVRs or voice biometrics or fraud management systems. So I think really it's about making more structured use of that data to all of the other systems that form a customer's
and I suppose it's a contact's a contact, no matter where it comes from, or a transaction's a transaction where it comes from. And it's almost like, how do you put that into the same engine to then solve for particular outcomes? I mean, I suppose, and it's then, can you use that technology to then find those outcomes and determine what the outcomes are, right?
So let me give you an example of that then, Chris. Yeah, because I think that you touched on a good point. So let's take a customer experience survey. Let's take an NPS survey. Yeah. So first of all, you might get an NPS score. You might be a promoter. You might be a detractor. You may leave some verbatim comments. You may be allowed to put 140 words or leave a minute's worth of comments on a voice survey. The true nature, though, of what really drove that outcome is buried within the conversation itself. What happened in the conversation that led to that promoter or detractor?
Right.
And because you've only got, a 10-15% survey take-up rate, of the other 85% of customers that didn't get surveyed, how many of them conversations have the same characteristics? And that allows you to predict detraction or predict promotion. So that's a good example of using the data from the survey and the data from the conversation, combining them together for to drive better customer experience and better business outcomes.
And I suppose it solves some, it's almost like responder bias. The fact that people respond are going to have a certain, they responded because they want to give an opinion, but it's the other 85% who didn't respond. And then how does that, and so what's your overall picture? It probably gives you a more accurate picture than just looking at the responses.
Correct. Yeah. And it's a great question, because I think that's a really good example of how you'd let the survey system, if you like, the CX system and the speech analytics system coexist and complement each other.
And how much more powerful is speech versus text? I mean, so because you get obviously, if you've got text being combined, you've obviously got the speech, what's actually being said, let's just say, but then you've also got all the subtle pieces that are happening in conversations as well. And it's just interesting as we move to much more of a digital kind of outcome, particularly for some of the more straightforward kind of transactions. Are we losing information? We're losing that subtle information a little bit around how customers actually feel.
Well, I don't know, because I'm not sort of heuristic scientist or whatever the scientists are for text. What I will say is it's absolutely definitive. Customers express themselves differently over different channels. How I would express, going back to my dissatisfaction example before. How I speak to an agent to say I'm dissatisfied is very different to how I do it on web chat. I might use LOL or sad-faced emojis or things like that. So you can't analyze. You can't just take the language of audio and put it into a web chat world and expect it to work, because it doesn't. You have to analyze with a different mindset and a different context within the digital world than you do within the voice world.
Yeah. So you see that even in social media as an example, right? The way people respond on social media could be really quite tough sometimes in terms of being quite critical, versus the way you do that on text versus the way you do that if you're talking to someone face to face, where you sort of a lot more sort of it's much more personal and much more of a relationship. People don't say those things when you actually speak to people face to face. And I'm just wondering if we decide channels based on preferences or on habits. I mean, or should we really be thinking about channels based on what the right outcome is? I mean, and what the kind of dynamics we want to have? I'm not sure if that really comes into it as much as this is what the customer wants.
I think that there's probably papers and papers and papers been written on this topic, but the way I look at it is people need human assistance when things are complex. Everybody leads busy lives, and aside of the digitally vulnerable, which we've already spoken about, what we want is the convenience to do the mundane stuff simply, easily, and effectively through self-service channels. When we break out of those self-service channels, we want the agents to be knowledgeable, to be helpful, to be skillful, and to be efficient in how my transactions handled. And the customer journey scientists need to be thinking about that efficient, effective, skilled agents, knowledgeable agents. And there's lots of technologies that, so this is a call that in the IVR or in the self-service channel, I've said what I want to talk about. It's an insurance renewal. It's a multi-car insurance renewal. This needs to go to Chris, because Chris is skilled about dealing with this. He's got the skills. So that whole sort of skills-based routing, I think, goes to the next level as well.
So it sounds like the call center's not dead yet. I mean, there's a bit of life, and it's around sort of specializing it, and then really sort of leveraging the skills there at the right time.
Yeah, one of the things that we see that I know infuriates consumers, and me as a consumer, not as a speech analytics guy, but as a consumer, when I make a call into contact center and I'm put on hold, or I'm transferred, or there's a lot of hesitancy, and one of the things we measure, and all of the wonderful things we measure, one of the things we measure is silence. Yeah, silence is dead air time that's doing me no good as the consumer, and my customers no good, because if they're paying for time that they're getting no value from. And it's amazing that when you look at, why does silence happen? And it's generally because of two things. The person dealing with the call hasn't got the skills or knowledge to deal with that call effectively, therefore they're hesitant, put me on hold, they transfer, or they haven't got ready access to the systems that they need, the data that they need, in order to in order to deal with my call. And there's delays in, pulling up my CRM record or finding my letter of complaint or whatever. So one of the things we help our customers with to avoid that friction in the experience, what are the drivers of silence? What's driving silence, and how do you eradicate it? That makes for that efficient and effective interaction.
Well, it's fascinating just to talk a bit about some of the things that you've been seeing, I suppose, from a speech analytics point of view. It sounds like, as you say, it sounds like there's still a lot to do, and the data is only ever expanding as well. That's what's also interesting in terms of diagnosing some of the things that are going on. And I do think will be sort of an interesting inflection point, I think, now having been in sort of lockdown for a year, in terms of where we go from here, I think, really. But it definitely seems like the last year has been a bit of a proof point in terms of using more data, using more technology to really analyze how customers are feeling. Really, I think it's probably only going to be more important going forward.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Well, no, I think we'll see. You know, certainly lots of my customers, they're not going to go to necessarily to a full blown let's everyone back into the contact center once the pandemic's over. There will be this mix of, you know, sort of hybrid work from home, more flexible working patterns, which I applaud and I think is the right thing to do. But therefore, the role of technology, some of the examples we've discussed, I think become more important and more sustained to make that
Okay.
a success.
Frank, thank you very much. I really appreciate you making the time today, and it's been great to chat to you, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you, Chris. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.